common characteristic of people with this trait is a lot of feeling of responsibility and conscientiousness. And that often plays out in taking on things that aren't necessarily ours or feeling a sense of responsibility.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Art and Science of Tending, where we explore how modern couples can build and sustain equal partnerships. I'm your host, Felicia, and today I'm excited to introduce a very special guest, Rachel Radway. Rachel is the CEO and certified executive and leadership coach at RER Coaching. She helps women entrepreneurs, business owners, and business leaders who are wired a little differently harness their superpowers, prioritize themselves, and redesign or realign their lives and work to shift from striving to thriving. Rachel and I first connected through my research project on high-achieving couples, and it quickly became clear that our work has a lot of common ground. Both of us are deeply passionate about supporting individuals in creating balance and thriving in their relationships and careers. In today's conversation, we'll be diving into Rachel's expert insights on boundaries, self-care, and overcoming the societal messages that often lead to imbalance. Rachel, welcome to the Art and Science of Tending. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Felicia. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. Let's start, if you could, share a little bit about your journey to becoming a coach for women entrepreneurs and leaders. What drew you to this?
Sure. So I have a background in corporate. I spent almost 30 years in the corporate world, both in tech and in nonprofit, before I ended up doing my coaching training and certification. And the entire time that I spent in corporate, I, first of all, was masking myself. So I was hiding aspects of myself, of my personality, to better fit in. And even though I always knew that I didn't really fit in, I also, whether I was in a leadership role, which I was for several years or not, spent a lot of time noticing what the leadership of my organization or team or company was like. And for one thing, there were very few women leaders in most cases, even in the nonprofits that I worked in. There were also a lot of women leaders who I felt were emulating role models who weren't necessarily role models that they might have chosen. They were just sort of role models by default. And by that, I mean, a lot of them were just white men because that's what they had seen as leadership. And there was just a lot of feeling of inauthenticity and a lot of lack of support. You know, where there were women leaders, there were very few of them, and they didn't always have others that they could look to, turn to, share with. And so I just knew when I started doing my coaching that this was a group that I really wanted to support and work with. And then I sort of got into I a little bit accidentally got into my niche, which we can talk about.
Yeah, let's jump into that, because I find that really particularly a fascinating part of your work. So you mentioned you work with women who are wired a little differently. How do you define that? And what unique challenges do these particular women face in their personal and professional lives?
I love that question about how do I define that, because I know that it is a very loose term. I will start by saying, so I have known all my life that I am highly sensitive. There is a book that came out in the late 90s called The Highly Sensitive Person by a psychologist named Elaine Aron. And it turns out that about 30% of the general population, both male, female, all genders, are highly sensitive. Mm-hmm. I always knew that I was sensitive to sound, to lighting, to various foods and alcohol and cigarette smoke and caffeine and some medications and just a lot of things. This played out in different ways that I didn't necessarily always notice in my career and also in my life. When I started thinking about who I really wanted to work with as a leadership coach, It turns out actually that when I started practicing, all of the women leaders who were initially drawn to me to work with me were highly sensitive, even though I don't think any of them actually were familiar with the term or had read the book. They didn't know that there was a whole population of people like them. They thought that they were alone. And a lot of them had gotten messages from childhood on. You're too sensitive. You need to grow a thicker skin. You're weird. You're broken. You're crazy. You need to change you, and you need to fit in better. I became really, really passionate about working with this particular group and helping them, first of all, learn about the fact that they're not alone. They're not broken. They're not crazy. They're not weird. That there's almost a third of the population are wired this way.
Yeah.
And it is actually differences in our brain that cause these sensitivities. And they also come with a huge number of superpowers, which are really hard to see when you're constantly being told you're wrong or you're broken or, you need to be fixed.
Yeah.
I was then late diagnosed with ADHD, which started to make sense out of some other things that had gone on with my life. And it turns out that there's a really big overlap between ADHD and autistic traits, which is something I also learned that I might have, and a range of other forms of neurodivergence and high sensitivity. So there's a high co-occurrence of these varying things. There are a couple of challenges. One of them is there is no test or diagnosis for high sensitivity. There are some assessments. They're all self-assessments that you can take. They're very quick and easy and fun. And you can determine whether you're highly sensitive if you don't already know that you are. But not everyone wants to be associated with the label sensitive, especially when they're in a leadership role, because it can sound like a weakness. In addition to that, we know that although a lot more women are being diagnosed later in life with different forms of neurodivergence, this is still a huge area that people are not familiar with. There's still a massive lack of understanding about what this means. It is still seen as a weakness or a disability or other things in various circles. So when you're talking with someone who is super smart and a high achiever and has worked hard all her life and has achieved success in her career, you don't necessarily want to go out and say, by the way, you're neurodivergent, because that can be intimidating. It could be scary. It could be, all kinds of things. And the label doesn't really matter, especially in cases where people don't need a lot of accommodation or support. What they do need, though, is to understand that their brains are wired a little bit differently from, I'm going to do air quotes and say neurotypical brains. I've never met somebody with a neurotypical brain. I don't even know what that looks like. All brains are different. We are actually all wired differently. But the phrase wired a little bit differently is just something that people seem to resonate with a little bit more. It's a little bit safer. It's a little bit, it's like saying moving to the beat of your own drum or, kind of doing your own thing.
Yeah, I love that. I think that, we all kind of, as you said, have these differences in our way of approaching our lives and our thinking, and to create spaces where people see themselves in those phrases are really, really, really important. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned in our previous conversation when you and I met before that balance and health within oneself are necessary before achieving balance in any relationship.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that, and then what that internal work might look like for your clients?
Sure. So one of the things that is pretty common with my clients is, again, they have superpowers. And I didn't mention what some of those are, but they include extreme empathy and an ability to connect the dots and make a lot of connections and see several steps ahead. Creativity, and strong intuition, and a number of other things that we could talk about. Another common characteristic of people with this trait is a lot of feeling of responsibility and conscientiousness. And that often plays out in taking on things that aren't necessarily ours, or feeling a sense of responsibility for everyone and everything. So we tend to put 110% of ourselves into everything we do. It can also come out, and I think this is a combination of things. It includes our extreme empathy and being able to read a room and understanding what other people need. So that, combined with our tendency toward perfectionism and our wiring to actually optimize for successful group outcomes rather than individual outcomes. We want things to work out. We want to help people, and we tend to struggle with boundaries. So we're often, we find ourselves saying yes to everything that's asked of us, even if we don't necessarily want to do it, even if our plate is already full, even if we've already got plenty of other things that we're responsible for. We know we can do one more thing, and we know we'll do it well, and we don't want to let people down. And it gets a lot more complex than that. But what it leads to is being out of balance. So we can get overwhelmed easily. Even if we did it all to ourselves, it's still overwhelming. We're dealing with a lot. And we don't want to let people down. We don't want to hurt people. We don't like conflict. We're not always confident about speaking up. And so it puts everything out of balance. And there's sort of a domino effect too, right? When you're working a 12-hour day, it's very hard to deal with your family, your partner, your home life, your personal life. You may not have weekends free if you've got all of these commitments and you can't finish them by the end of the workday. They may carry on over into the weekend, which of course affects everything else.
Yeah.
It all adds up. So I have forgotten your original question.
It's easy to go when you're in the flow talking about your passion and your work. I mean, my question was about, kind of recognizing when people are your clients are out of balance. And so that, you clearly covered that. But what I'm curious about, what are some techniques you might use to start helping your clients to start to do the internal work to recognize when their boundaries are either non-existent or not in alignment with what they need to create that internal balance, so then their relationships can both professionally and personally become more balanced?
Sure. So I think most of the time when clients come to me, it's because they're already aware that they're out of balance. They're just not sure why or what to do about it. So they know that they are verging on burnout or have already been there. They know that they are working too many hours. They may know that they are not being able to dedicate the time and the energy and the care that they want, for their family and their relationships. And it's probably showing up in their work relationships as well, because you can't be going, full steam and when you're out of balance, it comes out in everything you do, including your communication, which obviously affects your relationships. Yeah. So some of the things that we often work on are, first of all, really looking at core values and goals. And it sounds so simple and so basic. And we've probably done all kinds of exercises around this in school and in volunteer jobs. And it's the kind of thing that comes up in various contexts. It doesn't always come up, A, when you most need it, and B, in professional situations. And C, our values and our goals change over time. They can change with age, they can change with, your life situation. So it's really important to regularly reevaluate and reassess are the decisions you're making in alignment with your current core values and your goals? So there are exercises that I do with clients depending on their level of self-awareness and where they are in terms of knowing what they want. A lot of the time, the women leaders I work with are so used to going, and doing that they don't even necessarily have their own goals. They've been following somebody else's goals. If they're a corporate leader, they are putting 110% of themselves into the company goals, the business goals, what their boss wants them to do. It's a little bit different if they're an entrepreneur. It's usually their goals, and they may be a little bit more tuned into, how to get there. But we also it tends to be in our DNA to just, once we have something that we're focused on, we just focus completely on that thing. So there are exercises that I can do, to help identify or clarify what your core values are, and have they changed since the last time you looked at them? And then the harder part is, what are your goals? I was talking with a corporate leader a little while ago who realized in the course of a discovery call that she has just been sort of on this path that so many of us get on. We start our jobs and we follow that all the way through, and then we get promoted and we're following the goals set before us. And then she got married and she had a child, and the child had special needs. So she was focused on taking care of the child, and she was focused on her husband and what he needed. And when I started talking to her about her needs and her goals, she actually started crying because no one had ever asked her about that before. So there is a visioning exercise that I do where I really sit with people and give them space and ask them questions to look at what their goals might be and where they might see themselves 6 months, a year, 5 years down the road. It can really open up a huge space in your heart, in your mind, when you start thinking about, wait a second, I've been on autopilot this entire time. I've been focused on everyone else's needs. What do I need? And then you can start thinking about A, a strategy and a plan, and what steps you need to get there, and B, making decisions that are in alignment with both your values and your goals.
It's interesting. You said that it seems so obvious, these, but I think sometimes these simple exercises are sometimes the most powerful. And yes, we may know intellectually that we should do these things, but the actual act of doing them and then, carrying those forward into those goals are really critical. That's a big part of the work that I do too, is with couples, to help them make sure, one, that they're aligned on their values and their goals, but also to kind of deconstruct the gendered narratives around what women are supposed to do in their lives. And I know you mostly work with women. I'm curious how gendered stereotypes and gendered conditioning show up in the work that you do.
They show up a lot. And what's been really interesting for me is the different ways that they show up. Yeah. So I mentioned at the very beginning, a lot of women leaders have been conditioned to lead in a certain way. There are a limited number of examples that are out there for us, and a lot of those examples have been male. And so there are different things that come up depending on the person and how she was raised and her family background and a number of other things. But I've definitely had clients who, despite the fact that, again, they're super smart and they have achieved success, they're still, they still have work to do in the areas of confidence or speaking up. Many of them find themselves in situations where they are the only woman leader in a male leadership team. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've had people say, they just don't listen to me. It doesn't matter what my role is. If I don't speak up and start talking over one of the guys in a meeting, they just keep doing it. And I hear, I can raise a point and nobody will listen and nobody will respond. And then a guy sitting over here will say the exact same thing that I just said, and all of a sudden it's a great idea. So one thing that I definitely work on a lot is helping them see how much value they bring to the table, how much they've achieved. Work on their confidence so that they can see what outsiders see, what I see working with them, how competent they are, how much they have to offer, how smart they are, and how they bring a totally different perspective a lot of the time, because they are super perceptive. They can read a room. They understand what their teams and what their organizations need, sometimes in ways that the men sitting around the table don't, especially if they're not more sensitive to that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I've also had kind of the opposite. I had one woman, several conversations with one woman, a prospective client, who had a very strong personality. She didn't have issues with confidence. It was with some other things. She also was the only woman leader in, a field of men. And she got criticized for being strong and being confident. And so she constantly was being given the message that they wanted her to be more demure, more differential.
Yeah.
The word is
deferential. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're almost there.
Thank you. It just went out of my mind. To be more deferential. And she's just like, screw that. That's not who I am. That's not my personality.
Yeah.
So there are definitely, I keep thinking it's 2024 and we're getting past these core gender stereotypes and, we don't have to think that way anymore. And yet there's still so much of it, that's just foundational in our culture, in our families, in our workplaces.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's really just helping them understand how much they are willing to sacrifice and how much they are willing to continue masking, which, as we know, can lead to all kinds of burnout and health problems and problems in relationships, or what their limits are and what it's going to take for them to finally step up and find a different role that's going to be a better fit for them and more respectful and, a place where they can really be seen for who they are.
Truly, it as you were describing this, it sounds so exhausting to have to conform in ways that are not authentic to who you actually are. So, giving people the tools, women particularly, the tools to find that authentic voice, to lean into those superpowers is super powerful. So I love that. All right. Well, so we talked about, kind of the work that you do to start helping your clients to recognize, when things are out of balance and alignment, what kinds of, kind of goals that they have, and those boundary shifting. What do you start to see in your clients when they start to make those internal shifts around boundary setting and self-care and whatnot to create, healthier relationships?
I have seen such beautiful things happen. I have seen people blossom and bloom in amazing ways. Once they start understanding more of the patterns that they've been dealing with and how they're wired. One example is a nonprofit director who made such amazing changes. It was just beautiful to see. So when we started looking at the very first session that we did, she wanted to focus on self-advocacy. And I was thrilled with her. She was quick and she was a quick study. She really wanted to learn. After her very first session, she emailed me. She had come to me in a sort of difficult situation where the board wanted her to step up and take on a second job. So she'd be doing two jobs. And they basically were only offering her a very small increase in compensation. and they expected her to just take it. And so she had asked for some time, which is great. Um, we talked about some options, and she was going to prepare a presentation that we had talked about to showcase all of the value she had brought to the organization and what she felt that she was worth. They didn't actually give her time to do that presentation, but the results were even better than expected. When they cornered her and asked her whether she was ready to take it on and what she wanted, she asked for a 25% increase. And they said yes on the spot, which is just amazing.
That's amazing.
And I mean, it was like, I've never seen anything like that. It was awesome. Later in other sessions, we worked on a lot of things, and she basically came back to me at one point and said, I'm sleeping better than I have in 10 years. I've lost weight. My friends and family all tell me that I'm glowing. And I owe it all to you and to this coaching. It changed her entire outlook. And she was working in a situation where there was some toxicity in the environment. And it was a fairly small office, workspace. But she started really realizing her own agency and how she was a role model for most of the people in that office. And when she started changing the way she interacted with people, which was largely a function of working on her confidence and all of the other things that we talked about in coaching, the entire atmosphere of the office changed. And the little bickering stopped, and people started feeling more, they better understood how their contributions all fit in with each other's. And it was a dramatic change. So it was really lovely to hear about. In another situation that I just thought about, I was working with a client who actually, we didn't start working together because of the relationship with her husband, but it was something that came up during one session because she was particularly disturbed by some things that were going on. And she came back to me the following session and said, "You saved my marriage." And it was really all about a shift in the way she communicated with her husband and the way she looked at the behaviors that both of them were exhibiting. Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of things that make everything I do worth it.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's huge. When you have clients come back with dramatic shifts and improvements, that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I hear that you mostly focus on the professional kind of sphere that your clients are in, but it's very interesting to hear how those same dynamics can sometimes play out in our interpersonal relationships, particularly our romantic relationships.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it makes me think about the research project that connected us, which is, I theorize that these women, particularly who are high achievers, and I also see it with male clients, but, it's sometimes hard to show up in partnership with someone else when you are highly efficient, totally capable. Sometimes it's hard to share the load, both personally and professionally, when you can do it really, really well, Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's really interesting to hear about your own clients and how that plays out.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about, kind of the tools that you use, maybe for your more advanced clients where they've started to, recognize, the impact of the work that you do, like what happens next when they're working with you?
So everybody is different. There is no, one size fits all. It really depends on what's going on in their lives. So, one of the things that came up recently with somebody, something that I love working on is it's like an onion, right? And I'm sure you find this in your coaching work too. So you start with the outer layer, and once you get through that layer, then more things come up, and you start getting into deeper and deeper work and revealing other things that maybe they want to work on as well. Other things that come up are something that I call gremlins, and I learned this from my coaching training. I actually just wrote a post on this in time for Halloween, but they're not the scary gremlins, or they start out as the scary gremlins, and then they get less scary. And I actually have a visual aid if we want it too. So a gremlin is something that haunts you in some way. It can be a feeling, it can be just a burden that you're carrying around. And I had an amazing example of this myself when I was early on in my coaching career, and I was working with my coach. I can't even remember what the specific issue was, but I can remember in a couple of other clients' cases, there's just, it can be a fear or a message that a limiting belief that we are having trouble getting rid of.
Yeah.
And I ask the client to really see if they can see this fear or thought or belief or whatever it is, to give it form. And then to talk about what that form looks like. So how big is it? Is it, what kind of texture does it have? What does it look like? Does it have arms and legs? Does it have a face? Does it, is it the size of a house, or is it the size of a water glass? Does it have color? Does it have a voice? Does it have a name? And as you start coming up with the details, it becomes more of an entity, right? Then I have the client actually get into conversation with this entity, and we examine, why is it there? What is its goal? What is it trying to accomplish? Often we learn that there is something protective about it, that there is some reason that it's there that has to do with helping them or taking care of them or protecting them from something. And once they realize that, it may change form, it may change size. There's something about the dynamic between them and this gremlin that changes. And I can tell you that when I did it, or when my coach did it with me, we were talking about this problem, and I literally had this sort of fully formed monster drop into my consciousness. Like, I could see every detail of it. And it was huge, and it was purple, and it was furry, and it was like, it had very specific features. And we ended up getting into this dialogue, and the short story is that it became my bestest little friend. And I loved this gremlin so much that I ended up
oh my gosh, so cute. I love that.
So I'm embarrassed to say I don't even remember his name, because I gave him this really long name that was descriptive of the problem, and then I used an acronym, and it didn't make any sense, so I forgot it. But I love him so much, and he sits on this couch behind me, and he's a really good size for hugging.
Yeah.
And I also demonstrate him, when I'm working with clients, if they're a little skeptical about the whole gremlin process. But it's been amazing the way I've seen this work with clients, and how they've immediately softened and come to love this, creature that is really there to help them. And then they have a conversation about, thank you, I don't need that kind of help anymore. And the issue goes away. I mean, it's really an incredible tool.
So powerful. I love those visualization techniques, and that's such a fun way to manifest it. And you really made it happen. That is so cute.
I had to really manifest it.
Hearing that, so cute. I love it. Well, tell me a little bit more, like, you and I both are, very committed to like the individual work that we do with our clients. You've said multiple times that every client is different. And also you start to see some patterns develop as you're working with people. Are you working on anything right now about like the overarching themes in, the work you do with women who are wired a little differently?
Absolutely. So actually two things. One of them is I do group work.
Great.
It's a mastermind rather than a group coaching program. And one of the differences is there is no set program. It's a very loosely structured environment. There is a structure, but it's more about all of the people in the group having similar challenges, even if they have different backgrounds, and coming together to share their wins and their challenges and their goals. And it's kind of an amazing environment. And I'll just mention the name of the mastermind is the GRIT Collaborative. And GRIT is an acronym for Grace, Resilience, Intuition, and Trust, which are the cornerstones of the program. More exciting to me at the moment, although I love my GRIT members, I am working on a book called Perceptive, Owning Your Power When You're Wired a Little Differently. And the book is going to come out next year, but there's going to be a big pre-launch campaign in December. It is really, the book is part story. So my own story is in there, my own journey, learning about how I'm wired differently. I've also talked with a number of women leaders, both in the corporate world and entrepreneurs, about their stories. And they run the gamut in terms of, some are, they're all highly sensitive, but some have ADHD, some have other traits, some have never had a diagnosis of any kind. But I tell their stories in the book as well. And there are a bunch of tools and tips and techniques for how to redesign and realign aspects of your life and work so that you can create the conditions that you need to thrive. And I am super excited about getting this out there into the world and helping to raise awareness and empowering more women. The book is for everyone. It's not just for women, but the examples are all of women, since those are the people I work with.
Yeah, that's brilliant. How exciting. That is, sounds like a much needed resource and tool. Tell me about how people can learn more if they're interested in either your GRIT Mastermind program or learning more about this book and participating in whatever fun things you have planned in December for this pre-launch.
Absolutely. So the best way is to go to my website, which is rercoaching.com. It's my initials, RER. And you can both sign up to be on the mailing list for the book, and early subscribers will find offers and invitations that are not open to anyone else. So that should be fun. And you can also connect with me on LinkedIn. There are not very many Rachel Radways in the world, fortunately, and none of the others are leadership coaches. So I'm pretty easy to find there too.
Yeah, well, I'll make sure that both of those links are in the comments and the notes for the show as well, so people can find them easily.
Thank you.
Well, this has been a terrific conversation. I always like to wrap up my conversations by asking you if there's anything that I didn't ask about that you'd like to share.
Oh, wow. I think the main thing is, so many of us, however you're wired, if you've gotten any messages in childhood, from childhood on, that you are different or too much, or again, I use, weird or broken or crazy or alone, because those are words that come up a lot in the conversations that I have with women leaders.
Yeah.
You are none of those things. There are so many of us out there. We're all wired differently. That's where the beauty comes from. And you do have superpowers. You do have superpowers. I know that there are people who are who struggle with that word, and they feel that it diminishes maybe from some of the challenges that we have. I don't believe that, because I do believe that all of us have superpowers. Everyone has one. They're two sides of the coin. We have strengths, we have challenges, and they usually add up to the same thing. When you learn more about how you're wired and how you can leverage those strengths and harness those superpowers, you can do what I talk about a lot, which is creating the conditions you need to thrive, which means you're ahead of the game when it comes to taking care of your challenges. So that's one of the things that I try to leave with everyone I talk with.
Such an important message. Well, this was a great conversation. I loved talking to you, Rachel. It's an absolute pleasure. And good luck with all of it. I can't wait to hear how everything goes.
Thank you, Felicia. Thank you so much for having me on your show. And I hope it's valuable for your listeners. And
I know it will be.
good. And I look forward to future conversations.
Same, same.